We've taken a look at a number of ancient astronomers. Now let's take a look at a number of different ancient astronomy sites from around the world. You guys have two questions of the day today. The first one, what's the difference between modern astronomy and ancient astronomy? And two, what times of day or times of the year were important to ancient people? To go along with that second one, is there any sort of trend that you guys notice and why? Throughout almost all of history, what we would now refer to as astronomy was very closely related to astrology, trying to give some sort of meaning to what you see up in the sky. Which means a lot of cultures from around the world connected a lot of their myths or religions to what was going on up in the sky. Whether it was the sun and the moon, planets, eclipses, they based a lot of their culture around astrology. In your science journal, I want you guys to write down the name of each one of these sites that we go over, and then at least one piece of information, one fact about that site. Starting with probably the most popular or famous in the entire world, and that is Stonehenge. Stonehenge is in England. We don't know exactly how it was built because some of these stones are, even with today's equipment, it would be difficult to build. But Stonehenge, you probably have seen pictures of it. You probably know what it looks like. There it is on the screen. And it is used to observe the sun at different times of the year. Depending on the time of the year, the sun is going to rise at different parts of Stonehenge. And this is almost a way for whoever built it to keep track of the year like a calendar. It's going to tell them when the solstices are. It's going to tell them when equinoxes are. It's going to basically tell them what time of the year it is. Why is that important? You might think, well, just look at a calendar. Well, back 2,000-3,000 years ago when this was built, you didn't have a calendar. You couldn't look at your cell phone or a computer to figure out what the date was. Well, can't you just tell by the temperature? It's winter now, it's summer now. Yes, you need to be a little bit more accurate. And the reason is that if we want food, we go to the supermarket. We go to Publix, we go to wherever, Aldi. They had to grow their own food. And if it was wintertime and all of a sudden it warmed up a little bit, so they planted all of their crops, and then there was another freeze. It was like a weird warming in the middle of February. They planted their crops, and then it freezes again for all of March. Well, all of their crops are now dead. They have no seeds. They're not going to have any harvest, and they're going to starve to death. Because they were farmers, it is very important that they know exactly what time of year it is. That will let them know when to plant all of their crops, as well as when to harvest their crops. If they slaughtered all of their animals too soon before winter, they'd run out of food towards the end of winter. So they had to make sure that they knew exactly what time of year it was, and Stonehenge allowed them to do that. On the summer solstice, the sun is going to rise directly over one of these heel stones, and on the winter solstice, it's going to rise directly between two of these heel stones. So you can tell exactly when the winter and summer solstice happen. The summer solstice is the longest day of the year. The winter solstice is the shortest day of the year. Obviously, that's going to have some significance to ancient people, not only for planting, but a lot of ancient religions and ceremonies were actually planned around the winter and summer solstices. So figuring out when this happens exactly is going to be pretty important for these people. Newgrange is in Ireland. So let's go from England across the Irish Sea, landing in Ireland, and we get Newgrange, which is another astronomical site. It basically, to me, looks almost like it was built by a hobbit. It is a mound that has been hollowed out on the inside. It's got, obviously, grass on top of it. And this underground chamber has a very, very long passage. And there's one day out of the year that sunlight will get all the way down that passage and actually reach that chamber that's inside. That one day is the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year. And these four rocks that are right here, they actually will cast a shadow on the door, either on the summer solstice or on the equinoxes. So not only can you tell when the winter solstice is, but because of these four little pillars here, you can tell when the summer solstice and the equinoxes are. This is another calendar. This is another way for these agrarian people, farmers, to tell what time of year it is so that they know when to plant their crops, when to harvest their crops, when to slaughter their animals to get ready for winter. Their culture is built around farming. Their culture is built around knowing what time of year it is exactly. So these solstices are starting to get pretty important for these people, and ceremonies and entire religions are built around them. And on the winter solstice, you can actually see that sunlight travels all the way down this pathway to the inside chamber and will actually land on a stone basin. We don't know if there were sacrifices, but there's some sort of offering that was given, put in this stone basin, and on the winter solstice, sunlight would shine on it. You can tell that for this sunlight to make it all the way down this very long, narrow passageway can only happen if the sun is coming in directly at the right angle. And it only happens one day out of the year. Here is standing inside of that chamber that's in Newgrange, and you can see that it's going to be pretty dark 364 days out of the year, but on one day it's lit up pretty bright. The Bighorn Mountains out in Wyoming. These are famous because this is where Custer's last stand was. If you don't know what Custer's last stand was, General Custer was a cavalry officer for the United States Army shortly after the Civil War, and he took his cavalry out to Wyoming and basically wiped out entire Native American tribes, just killed everybody, men, women, children, and that kind of pissed him off. So they actually got a whole bunch of tribes working together, surrounded Custer's entire cavalry of about 500-600 men, and annihilated them and completely massacred them. Custer was killed. There's only a handful that survived because they ran away. But this is one of the, I guess, most famous battles of the Manifest Destiny, where white Americans were expanding out into already occupied lands. Back to why we have this on this slide. In the Bighorn Mountains, there is a stone circle. It used to be much more built up than this. However, people kind of came and started stealing these rocks. You can tell that now there is like a wire fence around it to protect it. But depending on which little pile of stone you stand at, and then what pile of stone you're looking at, you're going to be able to tell what time of year it is. So on the summer solstice, if you stand here, Aldebaran's going to rise directly over this pile of stones. Rigel's going to rise directly over this pile of stones. Sirius is going to rise directly right here. And if these stars are rising directly over these piles of stones, as you look across this circle, you know exactly which day the summer solstice is. And this was used for about 800 years by Plains Indians as a calendar to tell exactly when the summer solstice is going to be. Why? They did not farm quite as much as people in England or Ireland, but they did have to worry about buffalo herds migrating. They still had to store some food for the winter, so they needed to know what time of year it was as well. Here's another couple pictures of it. You can see that there is a chain link fence, and people are not allowed to come any closer because a lot of these rocks have been moved or taken by trophy hunters. Let's head from Wyoming down into Mexico. Chichen Itza. If I am saying that incorrectly, I apologize. I'm really white. So Chichen Itza is part of a ruined Mayan city in the Yucatan Peninsula. And in these different pyramids or ziggurat-shaped buildings, there was sacrifices, human sacrifices, all kinds of crazy stuff went on. But they also built an observatory. And this observatory is going to basically let them know what time of year it is. They're able to see when the sun sets on different days of the year, the solstices and the equinoxes. They can also tell when different stars are going to be at different places based on the times of the year. And while it's mostly ruined now, you can reconstruct the way that this would have worked. And light would have been able to come in through different windows and fall on different parts of this observatory. Another ancient astronomy site, another way to tell time. North just a little bit to Chaco Canyon. Chaco Canyon is famous because that's where the Anasazi live. The Anasazi were an entire civilization that had tens of thousands of people, and they just disappeared. Nobody knows where they went. It's a mystery. We think that because the cities got so big, they started cutting trees down, and basically their resources to stay alive just kept moving farther and farther out until eventually it was too far to keep this city going. You'd have to walk for days to get water or trees for firewood. And everybody just slowly kind of moved out of the city. We think that's what happened. We don't know for sure. Anyways, the Anasazi, up at the top of this mountain, which is called Fajada Butte. Again, if I'm murdering these words, I apologize. They took 3 giant rocks and laid them up against a wall, and then drew this like spiral shape on the inside. This spiral shape is going to be able to tell them what time of year it is, because it gets this dagger. It's called the sun's dagger. And during equinoxes, it's going to be on the right-hand side. And the summer solstice is right smack dab in the middle. And the winter solstice, you actually get 2 daggers on either side. So they were able to take these rocks, which weigh many thousands of pounds, and line them up exactly right. So at different times of the year, very specifically, you're going to get rays of light falling at different places on this spiral. You can tell how huge these rocks are. How they moved them there, I'm not really sure. But here is that spiral, and you can tell that there is a ray of light right here. If you zoom in, that ray of light is kind of offset, so that is one of the equinoxes. This is going to be the winter solstice, where you have that a dagger on either side, and then you have the summer solstice, where you have a dagger of light directly down the middle. This one blows my mind, because they were able to be this precise at different times of the year with nothing more than a bunch of rocks leaning up against a wall. Let's travel across the Atlantic Ocean, through the Mediterranean, till we get to Egypt, and a temple of Karnak. This is the same pathway from different angles. This is kind of a fisheye view, so it looks a little bent. But if you stood right here, you can see that there's pillars on either side. That's what you're looking at. So if you stood over here, you're looking down this alleyway. And this alleyway aligns so that they could tell what time of year it is. The sun would fall directly down this alley during the summer and winter solstices. They wanted to know what time of year it was, which is going to allow them to plant their crops, harvest their crops, and basically stay alive. When it was in use by the Egyptians, these columns were painted, possibly even gilded with gold. But you can tell that even today, the summer and winter solstice line up pretty perfectly. And you can tell exactly what time of year it is by using this temple that was built thousands and thousands of years ago. All right, now that we're in Egypt, let's talk about the pyramids. So the Pyramid of Khufu, these are those 3 pyramids that are probably the most famous. They're right next to the Sphinx. Khufu was the pharaoh who built them. And there's a little opening on the side of this pyramid. And 5,000 years ago, from the king's burial chamber, you could actually look out that little tiny opening that went from the center of the pyramid all the way to the edge. And what would you be looking at? Polaris, the North Star, the star that doesn't move. 5,000 years ago, remember the Earth wobbles, and 5,000 years ago, Polaris was going to be in a little bit different spot. And you could actually take a look out through all of this stone and see the North Star. You can't anymore because Polaris is in a different spot, but you can calculate where it used to be, and this is lined exactly. So this entire stone pyramid was built in a way that allowed them to make this little tiny opening going right towards a very specific star. Not only that, but the 4 sides of the pyramid, the base, those 4 sides are aligned absolutely perfectly with north, south, east, and west. They're aligned so precisely, actually, that current modern building techniques can't get it any more precise. So if you had lasers and you had GPS and you had giant cranes and earth-moving machines, and you designed this with a computer, you could not design it to be any more precisely lined up with north, south, east, and west than the ancient Egyptians did. How they did that, nobody really knows. It probably was not aliens, though. So this is that giant pyramid of Khufu, and if you cut away halfway, you can see that from the burial chamber, you can actually look out and see where Polaris used to be. And this is a picture of that little opening that they basically built the entire pyramid around. This one didn't necessarily tell them when the equinoxes were, but they were still aligned to a star and to the north, south, east, and west. So they still used astronomy to build this. And now I want you to answer these 2 questions. What are 1 or 2 things that they all have in common? And then, are there any differences between all of these sites?
Modern astronomy owes a great deal to ancient people. The people of ancient civilizations were as fascinated with the stars and the heavens as we are today. From the ancient Greeks to the Babylonians to the Maya, they all contributed something or discovered an important aspect of astronomy, and this lesson will take a look at just 3 of the cultures and civilizations that did so. Ancient Babylon was a city-state that was located near modern Baghdad. The Babylonians were very advanced astronomers for their day because they had a system of writing so they could record massive volumes of astronomical observations from which they created mathematical models. Mathematical models that created calendars could then be used to time important things throughout Babylonia, like business transactions. Nowadays, the world of business takes such things for granted, but it was very different in ancient times. It's important to know that while Babylonians contributed much to astronomy, including the ability to accurately predict astronomical phenomena, they did not conduct such investigations from a purely scientific standpoint. Actually, much of their work came about as a result of astrological influences, and Babylon was the birthplace of the earliest forms of modern horoscopic astrology. Like the Babylonians, the Maya, a group of Mesoamerican Indians, were just as interested in astronomy, and seemingly for mainly the same reason: astrology. Unfortunately, little knowledge about the Maya's use of astronomy exists because their texts were burned by Spanish conquistadors. What we do know is they developed something known as the Mayan long count calendar, which actually arose out of a very sophisticated number system that used a base of 20, as opposed to the base of 10 we use today. Regardless, such a numbering system and their astronomical observations allowed them to predict the motions of the planets and things like eclipses, which would oftentimes be used to prognosticate important events or to indicate a good time to do something like start a war. Warfare was also a large part of the Roman way of life, so much so that one ancient astronomer encompasses the melting pot of people that was conquered by the Roman Empire. Ptolemy was an ethnically Greek citizen of the Roman Empire who was born in ancient Egypt while it was under Roman rule. He was an astronomer most famous for developing the Ptolemaic system, one that influenced astronomical knowledge for hundreds of years, albeit a bit erroneously so. This model posited that the Earth was located at the center of the universe, something that has since been disproven. A lot of Ptolemy's knowledge came from Hipparchus, an ancient Greek mathematician who is considered by many to be the greatest astronomer of ancient times and the father of trigonometry. Hipparchus cataloged hundreds of stars and discovered the precession of the equinoxes, a term for the wobbling of the Earth around its axis, kind of like a spinning top. This wobbling helps explain why in about 12,000 years the North Star will no longer be Polaris and will actually be Vega.
So how has astronomy changed over the years? Astronomic sites used to be used to tell time. They used to be able to tell what time of year it was, which was important because they were farmers and they needed to know when to plant their crops. Ancient astronomers didn't necessarily look at the sky to answer scientific questions. They didn't look up there and say, I wonder how long that star is going to last. I wonder why that star is red and that one's blue. So they weren't looking for scientific answers, but they were using the sky instead to help them survive, to be used as a calendar. Not only that, but they also believed that different phenomena that happened in space would affect their daily lives. So if there was a shooting star, if there was a supernova that they saw, if there was an eclipse, all of those things they would try to interpret as, how is that going to affect my life? What does that mean for, if you're a king or queen, for my country? If you're an individual, for me and my family, or maybe for my religion. So ancient people used astronomy as a calendar to stay alive. They weren't necessarily looking for scientific answers, but they did base a lot of their myths and culture around the things that they saw happening up in the sky. Nowadays, we don't necessarily need to use the stars for a calendar. We can use a computer or a cell phone for that. We know where stars and planets are going to be. Thank you, Kepler. Instead, what astronomers are looking for today is scientific answers. Why do supernovae happen? Or how long is that star going to last? Or is there life on Mars? So astronomers today are not using it necessarily for a calendar to survive. They're not necessarily basing their religion around it, but they're looking for scientific answers. They want to know why things are happening. Now that I just told you that, go ahead and answer the question of the day. What's the difference between modern astronomy and ancient astronomy? And then the second question, what were the times of day or times of year that were important to ancient people that they used these ancient astronomy sites for, and why were they important? What's the trend between all of them? Well, I'm really white.